You're listening to the 14th source for all geeky and nerdy news and discussion, which means that you're listening to a podcast.
For all intents and purposes.
I am D. Bethel.
And I'm Andrew Asplund.
And we are your two overeducated, codependent nerd hosts, bringing you the things that we like to talk about, but filtered through inquisitive and critical lenses in the episode for Friday, June 24th, 2022. And let's just keep it going with the old man talk, dad talk. But it's hot here. Oh boy.
It is hot here too.
And the day of this recording, it was 104.
Oh, it was 74.
Oh, it's blistering sunlight there. Yeah. Yeah, oh, buddy. Yeah, no, it's summer officially, and I don't think it's going to drop below the hundreds until the end of the week, probably when you're hearing this, dear listeners. So please pour one out for me because I am thirsty. Heat wave, heat, hotness. That's what all those things we talk about here on this very show.
Right. Well, it's weird because in Seattle it was rainy last week and cool.
But a hot rain.
Because we had, I believe we had what they call third spring or whatever, like, I don't know, or third winter.
You and your Hobbit Seasons.
Right. So it's weird to just transition into 70s, and I suspect that we're going to move abruptly into something hotter in the next week or two. And then we'll get into my favorite season, smoke.
Oh, I'm not looking forward to that at all.
No.
But speaking of hotness, we're going to discuss what's been hot to us on our respective weeks by talking about the things that have been gathering our attention, keeping our attention, and piquing our interest by discussing our respective weeks in geek. It's been a while since we've done a week in geek episode. I guess nothing terrible has happened in the world of nerd news lately, so we can finally
probably things have, but we're just not paying attention.
So we're going to talk about stuff that makes us happy. Let's hope. We'll find out, won't we? And to do that, let's have Andrew start and tell us about your respective week in geek.
Yes.
So what was your week in geek this week?
Every time we do it, it's always weird. I'm going to talk about something mostly contemporary. I'm going to talk about a game that was released in the last month or two. Full release. It was on early access for years.
You're not going to talk about basketball again, are you?
No,
the NBA finals.
A video game.
Do you have thoughts about the finals at all? What's going on?
Yeah, I do have a thought about the finals. Fuck the Celtics, man.
Wow. Okay.
They didn't win though, so it's okay. Oh, so that's like 40 years of repressed Lakers anti-Celtics rage that I realized I didn't know I had. But anyway,
right.
Let's move on. No, I've been playing a video game, one that was released in the last month or two. Actually, I forget the release date. It's not important, but it's recent. And it previously been in early access. And that is Rogue Legacy 2 by Cellar Door Games.
Right.
So, full disclosure, we talked about Rogue Legacy, the original, like a bunch. Because I think both you and I had a really good experience with the original. Years ago, back in the before war.
Before everything.
Right.
For a lot of things, I guess I should say. Yeah, no, we are professed fans of Rogue Legacy.
Because honestly, I think when we talked about it both, I lived in my old apartment, which that means it was 8 years ago, 7 years ago? Like
before
back
the fall.
Back in the first year of the show. Mm-hmm. Right? And I think also with you, it was also...
I talked about it, I'm sure, in 2015, because I think it was the first game I bought for the PlayStation 4, and I got that in 2015. It came with Last of Us, but I bought Rogue Legacy.
Right.
And I think I beat it twice.
Yeah.
Because I was just so into it. Man, that game is so good. But Rogue Legacy 2.
It's out. Rogue Legacy 2, the sequel, which they've been working on for a while. Like I said, it was in open access on Steam, or early access. Open access. That's a different thing. Early access on Steam for, a year or two.
Right.
So for those that don't know, Rogue Legacy it's a 2D platforming game that is what a lot of people like to call a rogue light. And we've talked about what rogue means as a game definition, right? That it tends to mean a game where you play and for kind of short periods of time, it ends poorly and then you start again. With the idea being classically in the original Rogue, you learned more about the game every time you played, and you played better.
So your skill gets you farther through each run.
Right.
The run-based games, generally speaking.
And I think that's actually probably a better terminology now. It's a run-based game where you have a short run that you probably won't succeed, but it's short enough that you're like, all right, turn around and try again. Now, we've talked about a lot of games that are like this, right?
And actually, before we go on, is it endemic to the genre of roguelikes and roguelites, the procedural generation as well? Randomized maps and stuff like that?
Yes. So the original Rogue, it would procedurally generate a map. So that is also a feature. So it is, every time you play, it is different, right? You're not playing the same experience every time, but the fact that you learn skills every playthrough helps improve your experience.
And again, classically, we mean by learning skills is not like getting experience points and unlocking an ability. It's like you as a human being, become better at the game. Nothing carries over in classic Rogue, in Rogue itself, and classic roguelikes. Nothing carries over except for your ability. And in that sense, it kind of shares a bit with how people describe like Dark Souls and stuff, where like it's you learn how to play the game. That's not a roguelike at all, but they're hard games.
Right, they're hard, but it's short, and it kind of starts you over, and you're like, okay, let me try again. And you learn in that experience.
Roguelites, however.
So the roguelite, or there's whatever other terminology for them, and there's lots of games like these where there is that same aspect of you keep doing runs, you keep having playthroughs.
Maps keep changing.
Keep changing, gameplay keeps changing. But there's something you retain from play to play.
Right, some sort of persistence.
I mean, beyond your own skill, right? There's something that you are learning, something you are gaining as a profile, a character, whatever the game is.
Right.
I think some examples we may have talked about. Hades from Supergiant Games was a good example. That's a popular one. We talked about the Loopy game.
Loop Hero?
Loop Hero. There's another one where you gain something with every run, with every loop.
Dead Cells,
where there's something to be gained. And they all do it in different levels, right? Some are like, oh, you gain a little bit, right? You have a permanent feature, or you have some, minor increase. Some do it more.
In the case of Dead Cells, I think you do accrue some sort of currency that you can use to unlock new weapons that can drop in a playthrough of a run, right? And stuff like that. Or like if you get enough experience points, then when you start, you will start stronger than you would normally.
Right. So, and that's kind of how these games work. Is that
kind of RPG kind of stuff?
Right. So as you play through it, and the genre has its roots in role playing games, right? Because Rogue was basically just a D&D-esque back in the late 70s, early 80s. Right. Back before we knew what that would mean. So Rogue Legacy 2, we've talked about the first Rogue Legacy. So one of its initial things, the initial game, it's kind of like, oh, this is cool, this is fun, was that their whole like trailer was, this is the game where you're basically playing a lineage of characters, and every generation is a new run, right? So as you go into the castle or the whatever, your hero will die most of the time. And then the next character is one of their children. But Rogue Legacy always highlighted the fact that, and the children have weird features, That's kind of part of the initial charm, was like, oh, they have all these features, like this guy's colorblind. But guess what? When you play through this, it's all in black and white.
Yep.
Or whatever, like stuff like that. Or, oh, this guy has IBS, so he has tummy problems.
Yeah.
And some of them are relevant to gameplay. Some of them are entirely just for fun.
And some are positives and some are deficits.
Yeah, and some are the worst, right? Like some are like, oh, everything is upside down.
Yeah.
The original Rogue Legacy had that where like, oh, I picked this, whatever. And they have some scientific term for like, oh, you have a problem or whatever, or an issue. And you're like, okay, I'll pick that. And you go play this character, and suddenly the whole game is displayed upside down.
Yeah.
And you die in about 5 minutes. Right. At most.
A lot of the positives you have to your character are based around class. Right. Like there's different, like the fighter, mage, that kind of stuff, as well as like chef or cook or something like that.
Well,
right?
That's the new one has like weird. So the original game was, oh, this is a fun thing. Like you could be like the fighting guy or the wizard or the whatever. I think what the new version, Rogue Legacy 2, it basically takes everything that the original game did and learns from everything, right? Learns from their own games, including Full Metal Furies. It learns from other games in the genre, like Hades and like other games. It is kind of like, we saw the game that you all played. We spent a lot of time working on it, and we're now releasing the next version. And we've learned all the stuff to make this a better play experience all around. Like, we've detected what was interesting, what was missing, what was worthwhile, what was not. And to me, it's playing through it. I'm about 20 to 30 hours in now. It's hitting all the right spots. It is a kind of game where I love the original, right?
Yeah.
It was fun, but it was like, oh, okay, there's more they could do, you know? And they're really hitting all that, I think, in a really good way.
So how is it different? I mean, you don't have to go through every sort of checkbox here, but obviously I'm sure it retains most of what the original did, like everything that we covered, right?
Yes.
As well as I'm guessing it feels pretty similar in terms of sort of the snappiness of the controls, how the jumps feel, that kind of stuff. I'm guessing maybe structurally, because the game, even though the map was randomized, you're in this castle, and there are 4 directions out from the center hub that were different levels, basically each one with its own boss. Yes. Does it follow that structure? I'm assuming it kind of takes all the basics of that original game. What is it doing that's new, aside from new classes, and obviously the visual, I don't want to say upgrade, but aesthetic makeover they gave the game as well. What new does it bring to the Rogue Legacy brand?
So, much bigger game. Before, like you said, the original game was basically like a central castle with extra stuff in every direction. This one definitely adds more than that. I'm only, I don't know, I think maybe at most halfway through, and I feel like I've already played through as much as the original game.
Oh wow!
In terms of content. So that's I think one thing, but there's also like they've learned a lot about, I think, what makes the Metroidvania franchise work. So there is a certain thing where like, oh, you have access to this area, but you don't have the gimmick to make this area work yet.
Okay.
So that's another part, and you gain the gimmick, and those gimmicks are permanent installs, something that Dead Cells does, where like, oh, you can't go to this next place until you have this power.
Okay.
Once you get the power, you always have it, so you don't have to like rediscover it every run.
So even more Metroidvania-esque,
right? Which I think, like, in a way that other games have done well. So it's like, oh yeah, all your descendants have the whatever power, like the thing that lets you double jump. So once you have the double jump, you can now go into these other areas that you just couldn't go into before.
Right.
Stuff like that. I think that's a new thing that's really good. There's the way they've done like character development. So in the original, you had like a castle that you paid for every run with gold.
Right.
There's just a lot more to it. Mm-hmm. But in ways where, like, there's a lot more classes, a lot more characters that you get to choose from at the beginning. And you could say like, well, what does that matter? It's more of basically when you have a newly rolled set of characters, there's their class, which gives an ability and usually a default set of powers, which includes like a default attack, a default spell, and a default ability.
Okay.
And so there's like 10 of those, and then they all have an alternate that replaces a weapon. And they all play differently, right? It's not just they all have a big sword, but one has different stats. It's like, no, literally, like the knight is the guy with the sword, the shield, but the mage has a different attack that he has a magic wand that shoots and does weird shit. Okay. Or the barbarian has an axe where he has different platformer abilities. He has a spin attack and he has a whatever. So they all like mechanically feel different too. So it's not just, hey, this is just a different stat base. Right. Now you're like, well, but what if like you don't like a class? Like that is a fair issue, right? When you have different mechanics. Another thing they do is, hey, you get experience when you play classes. That actually adds to all your classes. So like if you play the knight, you get experience. And as you level up the knight class, you get an increase to all of your characters' ability to carry equipment.
Interesting.
Right. Huh. So it promotes, even if you don't like the class, there's a reason to play it and to get effective with it so you can get experience, because that improves all your characters.
There's almost a little bit of Final Fantasy V creeping in here. So.
Right. And it's one of the things that they did with Metal Furies. their previous game, which was they had 4 characters. It's like, well, what if you don't like the character? Well, you should play it anyway because it will improve all of your characters based on you playing more with the one.
Right.
So they do that, and I think that kind of stuff is really good. They also have good stuff where, like, in the castle, there's, it's randomized every time. They have, like, for example, places where you can swap out the weapon, the ability, or the spell that you have. So you would have instances where you find, like, a random thing of, like, oh, I can get a different weapon from a different character. Mm-hmm. And that creates interesting, like, oh, what if I had the character with these power, this ability, but then use the other character's weapon? Granted, it's a random thing, but when it happens, sometimes it's like golden. You're like, oh, this is a great combo. They also added like a relic system where as you go into the castle, you find these relics that give you new abilities. That you have some stats that you build that let you kind of control how many relics you get and what access you have, but it creates another like random variance that's you have that situation where you're playing and you have just like, oh, this was a great combination. It's not just how you start, it's also the path you go through to get there. So then like sometimes I've had runs where I just have that perfect combination of the character with the whatever, with the ability, with the trait, with the whatever, and I get really far. And I feel good about it because it's like, wow, that was a great combination. And like, I think like what roguelikes do is they give you that like affirmation of like, yes, it was random, but you also had to make choices to get there.
Right.
And that's the kind of like, I'm loving it in that regard. And they've added so much of that the original game didn't have that it just feels like it can be overwhelming. Like, don't get me wrong, but also like, you don't have to. You could just like play the game. A lot of that is just like some of it just happens because you're playing. Like you level up your class, you level up whatever. I mean, even one of the things in the original game is every time you go into the castle, if you don't spend your money, you lose it. Now that's its own mechanic that if you lose enough money, you get better. Which just like it's one of those things where it creates a thing where like as a gameplay thing, you can imagine a situation where you've done all the other stuff and you just have too much money. And now you're not able to spend it. The game now creates a situation where, but you're not wasting it. You're giving it to Cowron, who's the ferryman. He used to be the guy that controls the gate. If you give him enough money, he rewards you by giving you an increase to your abilities over time. Another thing that builds up, which I think for me, what I love is it creates a game where I like the game. Like it's a platformer. I love that. It's a Metroidvania-ish. But also it rewards, actually, or I'm going to be very upfront. It rewards me being bad at it.
Yeah.
Like one of my experiences with Dead Cells. I loved it, have a good time with it. I've never finished it.
No, same.
Whereas I had a friend who was like, oh yeah, real great. I finished it on my 8th run. And I'm like, what? Like, who are you?
Yeah.
Well, that's the guy that plays, Soulsborne games.
Oh,
right?
yeah,
Like
sure.
he's real good at that. I am not. So I can fumble fuck my way through the game and slowly make progress and still get there. Yeah, it may take me 80 hours to his 20, but I'm still having fun with it.
What I love about the game as well is that, like you said, it's about incremental progress, that each run you learn a little bit more about how to play the game as well. And since it's a roguelike, you get currency to actually improve skills and abilities and stuff like that. But that sense of accomplishment is when you finally reach the first boss and you beat the first boss and reach the second and third and fourth and even beat the end, beat the final boss and win the game. What I love about the first one, and I'm sure they do it in this one too, it kind of undercuts the feeling of like the power fantasy that you're experiencing, because like, oh, I beat this game. This is great. I did it. I am good at this game. What does it do? It goes through the family tree. And you just see all these characters who have names that died, and it just goes on forever. You're like, oh.
Yeah. Poor Sir Pepperoni the Third.
Yeah, right. Is there anything about the game that you feel could be better? You feel like there's something that they should have addressed from the first one that you feel they haven't or haven't addressed fully? I'm going to guess no. It sounds like you're really enjoying your time with it.
No, I think when it came out like a few weeks ago, a month ago, and I put it off because I was doing other stuff. But like once I really started it and started playing, I was like, wow, actually, it's doing all the right things.
Right.
It's the one thing is, I think the biggest difference from the original is it has that Metroidvania-esque of you have to get certain powers and abilities.
Right.
I think something like I would imagine they saw Dead Cells do, where like, oh, you unlock the burp derp ability, you always have it, so now you can access things. And that was one where like I had some trouble with that. Like I actually had I could not find the certain like the place where that ability was, and it was a struggle. And there's a certain amount, because they have so many things, like also like, oh, there's a thing where you find places where you can basically do like boss battles, like on the side, for currency that lets you then unlock other stuff, like, which is all good. It's all a big circle jerk. But then some of it's like, oh, I can't find how to do that, you know. Right. And I know the guys that make the game, the company Cellar Door Games, they're big puzzle people. Like that's actually one of the big issues with Full Metal Furies is that about halfway through the game, it turns into this bizarro puzzle game. And a lot of people didn't like that. And there's a little bit of that in this game where, like, for example, when you unlock the ability to do, like, kind of like the boss battle mode, which is separate. Like, it's like when you're in the town getting ready, you can go to the boss battle room, or I guess it's not boss battle, it's like the special battle room. And you can do the challenges, you get currency based on how well you play it. That's cool, but like you have to unlock them in the main game, and it gives you clues, and it's like, I don't get this clue. Like, where is this? And I kind of I think I've gone far enough where it's like, oh, I am behind on these, you know. Like I wish you would kind of like, hey buddy, did you not notice? Like that's the kind of thing where like that's the one complaint I have, because I don't want to Google it.
Right.
I just don't want I don't want the magic ruined of finding it myself. But also like, hey buddy, for example, once you get introduced to that mode, like it becomes a thing where it's like, oh, here's a clue, and that clue is very particular. Like you need a certain character class of your hero in a certain place to do a certain thing.
Right.
And it took me, I don't know, hours and hours to realize, like, oh, I saw the spot that they wanted me to go to, but I didn't catch that, like, I needed the certain character class to do it. That's the kind of thing where, like, it would be nice if they said, you need someone who's whatever, or, like, give me whatever, like, steer me in the direction.
Right.
So if there's any complaint, that would be the thing, is that they added all this, like, this extra content, but sometimes it's over my head. Right. So I guess I'm saying I'm not the best at these games. I wish they would pander to me a little bit more.
Fair enough. Well, right. What I love is that that Cellar Door Game seems to practice what it preaches. Because if you think about it, it's an example of the company developing like a roguelike, in addition to making a roguelike or roguelite game.
Right.
Because they, like with a rogue-like game, where you get better with each run by improving your own skill at the game, seeing what you did wrong and learning from it. They had one run with Rogue Legacy 1 and took those skills and what they learned and are doing a better run this time. So the proof is in the pudding.
Yeah. That's a good metaphor. But anyway, that was my Week in Geek, Dan. What about you?
Actually, I have two. Now that I think about it, but
whoa!
But I'm going to start with the connective tissue here, with what you had just talked about, because I recently played through a Metroidvania that was very surprising, despite everybody on the planet saying it was really good and did some innovative stuff with the genre. I played through a game called Ori and the Blind Forest, a game made by Moon Studios, I think it's called. And it originally came out in 2015, and it came out in 2019 for the Nintendo Switch, which is where I played the game. When it came out, it was kind of one of the big two, like, gold standard new Metroidvania games, along with Hollow Knight. I remember hearing those two talked about a lot. Like, this is the new shining example of what Metroidvanias should be. I played Hollow Knight. I don't think I finished it, but it was really tough. And I enjoyed what I played of it.
Although really tough.
Very, 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 very hard. And I just didn't have access to Ori just because it was a Microsoft exclusive. for a long time. I only had a PlayStation. So when I saw that it was on the Switch, I'm like, oh, I have a Switch now. Let's check it out. And it's very interesting. It's a beautiful game. It has a very strong animation in that everything is just really lovingly rendered, fluidly rendered, and kind of looks like a... this is going to sound weird. A cross between like a... And this doesn't really say anything, but like a Pixar movie and Limbo, the game. And it's Limbo... It reminds me of Limbo in that it has that... It's a 2D game, but with a really strong sense of depth. Where they have silhouettes in the foreground that can obscure what you're seeing at times. They have stuff going on in the background. It has a mood, but it's very... Unlike Limbo, it's a very bright and colorful and cheery mood, despite being a very kind of somber story. As far as the story goes, it's a really simple story, but it's a Metroidvania where you play as Ori, this forest spirit kind of creature. It kind of looks like a Stitch from Lilo and Stitch, but made all angelic and less menacing. And you are a creature that inhabits this gigantic spirit tree that is the central, kind of like if you've seen Avatar, right? Those big giant spirit tree in the middle of this gigantic forest. And you've fallen from the tree. And your fall, for lack of a better word, causes catastrophe. The spirit tree wants to know where its child has gone and went to any lengths to find the child, which basically means it sent out this big blast of light to try to illuminate the forest to see where Ori went. But they couldn't be found. And so, because this blast of light was so intrusive, it caused some problems with other inhabitants of the forest, which led to basically the spirit tree being killed, or at least extinguished. The story is you as Ori, and you have this little sort of floating spirit light next to you named Scene, and it kind of acts as it's like a tool, for lack of a better word. And together, utilizing your abilities and the abilities you come across, as well as other trinkets you pick up to extend your health and ability points, you traverse this gigantic map and the different regions across it to find the artifacts you need to bring life back to the spirit tree, which will thusly revitalize the forest that surrounds it. And it's a Metroidvania in every shape and form. Opening up the map, you can kind of see how it works. But the interesting thing is this, and it has to do with how it fits into the Metroidvania genre. Because one of the things that the term Metroidvania insinuates is that on the Metroid side, it's an exploration 2D side-scroller that involves basically projectile weapons. And the Vania part is a 2D exploration platformer that often is melee-focused, right? I'm not saying that's the distinction, but that's kind of two approaches that games can take to this genre. Ori doesn't do either. The character itself does not have any combat techniques. There's a floating little sort of spirit that can kind of do attacks and stuff, but mostly it's about movement and avoidance. And this is emphasized in the fact that, and this is what I really liked about the game, there's no boss fights, which is also kind of new for Metroidvanias. And instead, it's more like, oh, you collected this artifact, and in like the forest or whatever, that biome is returning to its previous state. And so what was a big, empty sort of dead forest, it's, the wind is coming back and it's blowing shit everywhere, and you have to basically outrun the wind. Or like there's one level where water just starts pouring back into the place, into these caves that you've been traversing, and you got to kind of sort of jump, you have to ascend to get out of the cavern so that you don't drown. And so the closest we have to boss encounters are basically escape sequences. and that applies, I guess this is a spoiler for a 7-year-old game, to like the final boss. There's a villain, there's an antagonist, but the final sequence is you outrunning the boss, or the bad guy, the antagonist. And what this allows the game to do is really to do something that I think a lot of Metroidvanias haven't done. I'm not saying it hasn't been done, but it by taking that kind of combat loop out of the game, again, there are combat elements in it, but it's not the core of the game. It allows it to actually emphasize the story a bit more. Now, it's a simple story, and it's a predictable story. But what it does with characters, how it uses the map and the genre and these sequences to tell these stories and to give characters depth and to unveil sort of plot points is actually really effective and feels really organic with the gameplay itself. It's a particularly moving game, emotionally speaking, and I found that really interesting and clever. And I think the thing that surprised me most is that this is a game that I've heard hyped for years, and it's one of those instances. I think the last time I really felt this way was, I think it was seeing Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, where I'm like, I heard this thing is getting hyped so much, and then I come out of it and I'm like, yeah, that was great. It actually did something new with the genre, whilst also being an excellent example of that genre itself.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't played it. In fact, I don't actually know. I've probably heard of it. I don't think
it's probably in a humble bundle somewhere.
Yeah, actually. Oof.
One of the cool things they do has to do with sort of how abilities are used. You have a health meter, and then you also get these sort of pips that are basically ability points. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the collectibles you can get throughout the game. You can add more ability pips to your stash. And to use abilities, except for very basic ones like, movement abilities like double jumps and stuff like that. But if you want to do like a dash, or if you want to do like a super jump, you basically use ability points. But there's another thing that you can do with ability points that I thought was really novel, is that if you have at least one ability point, you can just hold down, I think, R1 or something like that, and you create a save point for yourself. And so you can actually kind of save, and you can save anywhere by just creating these little save points. And it really makes the run-based nature of this game, because there's no bosses, it is kind of a puzzle. The game is made up of puzzle rooms. How do I get from here to there? How do I get from there to there? And if you plan your save points well, the game already has a pretty good sort of reset. Like if you die, you come back to gameplay very, very quickly, but you get there even faster if you realize, oh, this is going to be a problem. I'm going to drop a save point right here, and that save point is active until you decide to drop another one. So it's on the map. You can always kind of come back to it, and it's really cool and made it part of the actual system instead of just press the start or select to do this.
Right.
It's actually part of your ability set. I think that was pretty cool. So yeah, it does a lot of interesting, unique things. Yeah.
Well, it sounds good. Again, it's one of those games where I just haven't played it.
But you play lots of Metroidvania.
I do. And now I feel like I'm already adding it to my list of like, oh, let me check this out. I hear good things.
Although I know you're more of a fan of the Vania part than the Metroid part.
Yes.
But I guess leads me to the second Week in Geek. I want to talk about another video game. And actually, kind of in line with what you just talked about, I'm going to talk about a new game that came out, I believe, this week.
What?
Yeah. Not a Metroidvania, though, so that's where I dropped the ball, and I apologize for that. So the game I played is a game called Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge.
Oh, shit!
By Tribute Games.
Sorry, that's on my list of, like, I want to buy it because I hear the best things, and you just said you're playing it. Now I'm like, oh!
I beat it twice. And it came out, I think, Friday?
No, I've heard nothing but good things.
I beat it 3 times because I played through it online with a friend today. It was pretty exciting. Although I learned my internet sucks ass. But I think we knew that. So, yeah, it's a side-scroller beat-em-up a la Final Fight, a la...
The original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
The arcade game?
The arcade game, yeah.
Yeah, Simpsons arcade game, the X-Men arcade. I think it probably shares most of its DNA with the X-Men arcade game, that 6-player arcade game.
I'm sitting here trying to remember, like, oh, yeah, how many, like...
There's 5 or 6, but the cool thing about the there's never too many X-Men. You take that back, sir. The novelty of it, I think The Simpsons was like this as well. You could have a bunch of people at one arcade machine and they're all actually playing the game. The thing is that in a home console or in a home gaming situation, side-scroller beat-em-ups are, what's the word? Boring. part of the attraction of those games is I got to go through these waves of enemies, and I only have this many quarters to do it. Right. Some of those games where you've had timed levels and everything like that. When you have infinite continues and it's in the comfort of your own home, those games aren't that fun. And I know this for a fact because
you've tried them all.
A couple years ago, Capcom released its beat 'em up bundle. I'm like, oh, fuck yes, we'll do this. Let's do this. I loved all these games, and they are boring. So a lot of recent side-scroller beat-em-ups that have been recently developed, I should say, have been actually trying to do new things to make it a fun genre in a home gaming context. I say that with, I think there's a recent Streets of Rage game that I think Streets of Rage for the Genesis / Mega Drive, one of its innovations was it kind of had fighting game kind of movements that you could do that you could use in game, and it adds on that with the newest Streets of Rage. But TMNT doesn't do that. But I will say this, when you load up the game and you go into either story mode or arcade mode, you're automatically put into the sort of how to play screen, where they just kind of go through the different moves and abilities that you have. And it's 21 pages long, right? Now, the quick scroll throughs and you can skip it. But everything from, every type of, basic combos to all the different jump attacks, all the different throws, all the other sort of buttons that you have available to you. Nothing too complicated. You're not doing Street Fighter moves in this game. But I will say this, it's fun to play. It's a lot of fun to play. It's very snappy, very quick. And a lot of the annoyances I had playing those old beat 'em ups again, it compensates for those problems, even though in theory they would still exist. Meaning something like this, those side-scroller beat 'em ups are kind of multi-plane games where it's not just everybody's on the same floorboard going at each other that you can move up and down. The problem is those hitboxes can get a little confusing. And so I'm going to charge that guy across the screen. So you double tap to start running, and then you press your attack button and you swing. But since the person was 5 pixels above you, you miss. In this case, if the game sees that you're running towards an enemy, because you're running, it'll kind of auto guide you to that enemy so that you're always hitting something, you're always doing something, and you always feel engaged and never feel like you're fighting the game. Yeah.
Right. Rather than the Foot Clan.
Right. But of course, the biggest draw is it's
for you,
the animation. And
oh shit,
I don't know what you were talking about. I was going to say, I don't think there's any X-Men in this. No. But the art is beautiful. The animation is fluid, but doesn't get too, it doesn't slow down your ability to move quickly and stuff like that. I hate to say it this way, it's a game made for people in their 40s. Because it's clearly a throwback to the original cartoon. It's using those aesthetics. It's using those voice actors. They got all the original voice actors to come back for their roles, for the Turtles at least. It's just a nostalgia party, but also a fun game to play. Again, it's still fairly new, and I'm figuring it out, but I'm still just in it, and so I just kind of like with you and Rogue Legacy, I just love playing it. That I haven't really done a lot of critical thought on it yet. But
right.
That's kind of what I've been doing this week.
Well, and I think there's something to be said about that, right? Like there's something about, hey, I've played this game a bunch and I've had enough fun that I've played it a bunch and I haven't had the time to think too much about it, right? Like that says something to me, because there's a lot of games where you start playing it, you're like, whoa, I have thoughts, right? And I think that yes, in 6 months we'll both have big thoughts about Rogue Legacy 2 and TMNT Shredder's Revenge.
Right.
But right now we're both just enjoying it. And to the fact where
in it to win it.
When I've seen people talk about TMNT Shredder's Revenge, I'm like, oh, I actually want to play that. Like everything about that looks fun.
I should say it's fun as a single player experience. And I should say there's 2 major modes that it has on it. There's story mode and arcade mode. Arcade mode is just kind of like this straight, here's all the levels in order. You have the limited amount of lives, that kind of stuff. The story mode is all those levels, but this is another interesting nostalgic throwback, but it's the nostalgia that no one really has nostalgia for, in that there are obviously little story sequences, not animated, but cute.
Right.
But when you finish each level, you pop out to an overhead world map. that looks a lot like, obviously in updated graphics and stuff like that, the overhead map from the original NES Ninja Turtles game, i.e. the one no one likes to play because it's so offensively hard and poorly made. Not the NES version of the arcade game. There was a original NES game, I think most well known for its absolutely terrifying swimming level. I was like, wow, this can't be coincidental. The nice thing is, you have 6 characters to choose from. You have the 4 turtles. You have April and Splinter.
What? No Casey Jones?
Skip ahead 10 seconds if you don't want to know a spoiler.
Okay, just checking.
But yes, Casey Jones is in the game. Once you beat the game, you unlock Casey Jones. The interesting thing about the story mode is that as you progress through the levels, you're getting points. You're getting points all over the place, right? Keep fighting enemies, getting combos, like, successive hits, and you got 150 hit combo, finding hidden things, that kind of stuff, all giving you points. And what that does is that you level up. Now, you don't get ability points and you don't assign it to stats or anything like that. But what they have when you look at sort of, when you're on the overworld map, you can go back to the Turtles lair and you can see all the collectibles that you need to get. And one of the screens is it shows you kind of what you unlock with each level that you gain. And for some of them, like, you have your health bar, and you also have like a power meter that once it's full, you can hit a button and you do a super move. Now, you hit a certain level, you get 2 of those bars or 3 of those, right? Or when you hit a certain level, and you always start the level with 1 extra life more than you had before. You unlock new moves, new super moves, that kind of stuff. So there's progress that you make throughout the game. Mm-hmm. So you're not only progressing the story, but you're like, you have more available to you as you play the game. The only sort of negative I would say about the game is that this sort of point system and this leveling system is what the whole thing is, especially the story mode, is built around. But beyond that, it's just you playing the game. And what I mean by that is that there's lots of collectibles. Like, there's a screen that shows like it's just a bunch of question marks. So you got to find them in the game. So there's characters hidden throughout the game, and there's a door in the background that's pulsing. It's like someone's trying to, knocking on it really hard. So I walk up there and start hitting, and it opened up doors. It's like, oh, you found, Vernon, April's coworker or something like that. Like, cool. And he becomes like a side quest on the overhead map saying, like, I got a bunch of VHS tapes spread throughout a bunch of levels. I need you to find them for me. Right. And there's a bunch of those side quests that pop up. So it kind of becomes a cool game, part of the game where you're like, any sort of destructible element on screen, I have to break everything to see if there's a collectible in there. And once you find the certain amount of things that they're asking you to find, you go back to them. But like, all you get are points. Like, I was hoping he's like one of the characters that has side quests is April's boss, who runs Channel 6 News, right? What you are finding for him are headlines for newspapers. Which is strange because it's a TV station, but whatever. I thought that maybe when I found all of those, because there's like an icon for it in the on the collectible screen, like, oh, am I gonna, like, if I click on it, will I get like behind the scenes stuff? Will I get some development stuff? Will I get anything? And no, like, there's no. That's the one thing I think that this game kind of lets us down on, is there's no extra materials that it seems like it should have. Kind of like the Mega Man Legacy Collection, where it has all that extra stuff.
Right. Where you play to unlock something.
Right. And especially
points. Especially
since this is for nostalgic people in their 40s, and it's clearly a pastiche, and they got the licensing and all that stuff to pull from that original animated series, to have no sort of archival aspect of it, of that kind of stuff, is kind of a letdown. Because a lot of the nostalgia play we're seeing in this sort of vein has that. Mm-hmm. And this is just a really good game, and that's fine. But it kind of disengages further playthroughs, I should say.
I would say even other games have gone beyond. Like, there's this idea of having that, like, nostalgic stuff, even in games that aren't nostalgia, right? Like, games have, like, here's the art, here's the whatever, here's, A
really good example of what I'm talking about is actually the DuckTales Remastered. They had a bunch of stuff that was unlockable. I think a lot of the Mega Man Legacy stuff, is just available. With the DuckTales Remastered game, you can unlock art made for the game, but also had, like, developmental sketches, pencil sketches, cell art of the original TV show, backgrounds, painted backgrounds in the original TV show that you could unlock as you accrue whatever currency you're using to open that stuff. It would be cool to have something like that in this game. And honestly, it could still be something they add to it because games are always unfinished at this point. Right. But to not have it there is kind of a letdown, but maybe that's just the history nerd that I am, because it's a great game that's really fun to play on its own.
Well, that's good, right?
Yeah.
If nothing else, like, honestly, the fact that everyone is saying it's a good game, that's all, like, I'm like, well, good, like, because that was a good chance for not good, right? Like, there's right. A lot of nostalgic games that are like, woo, swing and a miss.
Yeah.
Right.
And, Leonardo, they brought Cam Clark to be Leonardo, but unfortunately, he never says, I live on in this arm. Or in this katana, even. So if you, dear listeners, have any thoughts about the topics we discussed this week, feel free to leave your thoughts as comments on the page for this episode at forallintents.net.
You can also post your comments or engage in conversations with other listeners on our Facebook page.
You can also find us on other social media at our respective handles. On Twitter, you can find me at dbethel. You can find Andrew at Profound Dark, where you can find him tweeting about tabletop role-playing game and other stuff that interests him. You can also find us on Instagram, where you can find Andrew at Profound Brick and me and my work at dbethel comics.
While you're on our website for allintents.net, you can also take a look at our YouTube page, or maybe you're already there because you're listening to us on YouTube, because now our YouTube page features our audio. If you're there listening to it, go ahead and like and subscribe, or as I like to say in the business, ring that bell.
We use 2 tracks of music for our show. One is called Disco Medusi, the other is called District 4. They're both written and performed by Kevin MacLeod of the Clan MacLeod, immortal swordsman, graph paper enthusiast, and musician extraordinaire.
You can find his music at incompetech.filmmusic.io, and that's all licensed under the Creative Commons Attribution License.
If you like the show and like to help us out, the best way to do so would be to subscribe to the show using whichever podcasting service you happen to use. What would help us out even more would be to leave some sort of review. Whether it's a text review or using their proprietary metric will help spread the word to new potential listeners through the magic of algorithms. Well, I hate to say it, it sounds like we are actually 2 guys that are on top of popular culture. Look at us, playing new games.
I wouldn't say that.
Huh. Why is that?
I wouldn't say that. It's just video games.
Right. Well, speaking of which, it's not, you're not too far out of date, because this week, Andrew, Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange, which I just realized this week stars 2 people named Benedict. But this week...
2 people?
Yeah, Benedict Cumberbatch and Benedict Wong, who plays Wong.
Oh, I actually didn't realize his name was Benedict.
Yeah. But that, Doctor Who and the Multiverse of Madness drops on HBO.
Multiverse
Is that what I said? I keep saying that. Doctor Strange and the Whoniverse of Madness. Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness premieres on Doctor Who this week. No, it's on Disney Plus, so you can go watch it and be cool like the rest of us. And just to maximize your viewing experience, keep in mind that you're watching a Sam Raimi movie that happens to have Marvel characters in it, and not an MCU movie that happens to be directed by Sam Raimi. It's important.
Right.
Do you think you're going to catch that anytime soon, or is that one you're going to get to when you get to it?
I hope so.
I'm not pressuring you. I'm just like, where is it on your radar? Like, is it something you're excited to get to, or is it like,
We'll find out.
You know how to create continuity here.
I mean, I'm literally, while we're recording, looking up when does it release and thinking, it may be available right now.
So, until you may or may not do something that you want to do, dear listeners, I'm D. Bethel.
And I'm Andrew Asplund.
And for all intents and purposes,
that was a podcast. It feels really like 20 years ago.
Yeah. Welcome to academia. We start tomorrow?
Yeah.
That's exciting. Do you have your school books? Do you have your note paper? Do you have your pens and pencils?
No.
You wear a little schoolboy outfit like Donald Duck, but with pants?
No pants.
Hello.
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 Big Glenn. You two be annoying.
Doctor Who and the G.I. Joe of Transformers. So we're we wigging it?
Yeah,
Is that the idea?
that's good.
All right, you got a wig?
Yes.